Disculpe.
Welcome, everyone. Bienvenidos. Now it's time for our interpreter's message.
Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. This introduction will be in Spanish and English for now. Buenos días. Esta presentación de nuestro anuncio de lenguaje, acceso al lenguaje va a ser en inglés y en español. Un recordatorio de que esta reunión será bilingüe, entonces vamos a estar interpretando simultáneamente.
So this is a reminder that this presentation will be in English and Spanish, so we will be interpreting simultaneously.
Y mi nombre es Delesh López y estaré con mi cointérprete Sheila Hong.
My name is Delesh Lopez, and I will be here with my co-interpreter Sheila Hong.
Un recordatorio, por favor, de mantenerse en silencio si no está presentando o participando, así podemos minimizar el ruido de fondo.
A reminder to please keep your microphone mute if you're not presenting or if you're not speaking. That way we will be able to keep the ambient noise to a minimum.
Y también un recordatorio de hablar de una manera un poco más despacio, más moderada, porque estamos interpretando todo y queremos asegurarnos que estamos interpretando todo lo que están compartiendo.
And also another reminder to please speak slower at a moderate pace because we want to interpret everything that you say, and we want to make sure that we share everything that you want to share.
Si necesitamos que hablen un poco más lento, nos van a ver haciendo esta señal con nuestras manos, a Sheila y a mí. Esto quiere decir que necesitamos que hablen un poco más despacio.
So if we need you to speak slowly or at a slower pace, you will see both Sheila and me make this hand gesture with our hands if we need you to slow down.
Y si no les escuchamos, su micrófono no está prendido, les vamos a pedir que hablen más alto y nos van a ver haciendo esto con las manos.
And if we're not able to hear you, or if your microphone is off and we need to hear you, you'll see us do this hand gesture.
Y por favor, un micrófono a la vez, porque si hay muchas personas hablando a la vez, no vamos a poder interpretar. Y vamos a hacer esta señal. Sorry.
And please remember that it's just one person at a time, one mic at a time, because if we have more than one person speaking at a time, we won't be able to hear what is being said. So we'll do this signal in order to let you know.
Y finalmente, al final de esta presentación, vamos a activar la función de interpretación.
So finally, at the end of this presentation, we will activate the interpretation function.
La interpretación de función será activada y encontrarán un globo por de fondo de su pantalla de Zoom.
So once the interpretation is turned on, you can go to the bottom of your screen where you will find a globe icon.
Va a oprimir ese botón y van a ver Language Interpretation, van a buscar su idioma, será o inglés o español, y lo elige y lo activará.
So you want to go down to that globe icon, click on that globe icon, it'll say Language Interpretation. You will see the two options that say English and Spanish for today's language, and you will select the language of your choice.
Si está conectada en una tableta o en un celular, buscará los 3 puntos, lo va a oprimir y encontrará Language Interpretation, su idioma, inglés o español, y va a oprimir Done o finalizar.
However, if you are on a tablet or a smartphone, you'll want to find the 3 little dots. You want to click on those 3 little dots, and it'll pull up the menu for language interpretation. Once you click on language interpretation, you'll see the language options, English and Spanish. Click the language that you prefer, and you'll also need to click on Done in order to activate the interpretation.
Y si tiene alguna dificultad con esto, por favor nos avisa, escriba en el chat y alguien del personal le va a responder y le va a poder ayudar. Y con eso vamos a empezar la reunión y vamos a activar la función de interpretación. Cuando se activará, vamos a probarlo y asegurarnos que todos nos escuchan.
So please remember that if you have any difficulties with the interpretation, if you cannot hear, please let us know so that somebody on staff can help you out. Please send us a message on the chat. And right now, when we ask that the interpretation is active, we'll try it out to make sure that everybody can hear us in their channel.
Okay, we can activate interpretation now. Muy bien, entonces quiero asegurarme que me escuchan. Ahora estoy hablando en español y las personas que hablan inglés nos deben de escuchar en el canal de español. Las personas que hablan inglés, dedos arriba si me escuchan. Elijan su idioma, por favor. Para el personal, voy a cambiar al inglés. For English speakers, I was doing a sound check. Did you choose your English channel? You should have been able to hear me there. Ahora voy a hacer la prueba del canal de español para las personas que hablan español. Sorry, let me switch that up. Now I'm going to do the test for the Spanish channel, Spanish speakers. Great, Susie, I'm glad you can hear the interpretation. Other folks in the Spanish channel, we're all set? Okay, I can't see everybody, so let us know if the staff can let us know if anybody's having issues. Thank you, Susie. We have two Susie Santiago, so both Susies are good, so I think we're good. So para las personas que hablan inglés, ahorita deberían de estar escuchando a Sheila interpretándome. Por favor, enséñeme un dedo diciendo que sí me escuchan, Deberían de estar escuchando. Cynthia, muy bien, me escuchas bien. Perfecto, Caroline. Bueno, estamos listos. I will now pass on the mic to Caroline.
Hi, my name is Sarah Delgado. I am a project coordinator for the Del Amo Action Committee and Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network. Before we get started, there are some Zoom housekeeping things that we would like to discuss. Number one, please mute yourself when you are not speaking or presenting. And number two, this meeting will be recorded and will be available online. So now I'm going to pass it to Cynthia Babich, the Executive Director of the Del Amo Action Committee and the Coordinator for the Los Angeles Environmental Justice Network.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. These workshops are very important for us to try and have a seat at the table when stormwater decisions are being made and resources are being allocated. The LAEJ network is the sponsor of these stormwater projects. This group has been meeting for the last 15 years with communities, enforcement stakeholders, and other agencies, really trying to level the playing field in our environmental justice communities. So I want to welcome you. We have a lot of awesome information that's going to be shared with you today. Ben and Caroline are anxious to get going. And so again, thank you so much for joining us today. We sure appreciate it.
Great. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Caroline Orija. She is also coordinator on this stormwater project.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Our agenda for today, this is workshop 2 of 4, so we're looking forward to seeing you all to our next workshops. This one is going to focus on environmental justice and stormwater. And then we're going to have a nice presentation from Benjamin Harris, of staff attorney with with LA Waterkeeper, or Los Angeles Waterkeeper. Then we're going to have a break, and then we'll have question session. We'll have some nice time for question session. And then we'll feature a project, a stormwater capture project that was organized by a local nonprofit in the northern Los Angeles County area, Pacoima Beautiful. And then we will wrap up and give you information for our next workshop. Thank you. Next slide, please. So stormwater and environmental justice, it's very closely related. When rain falls in urban areas, it flows through our streets, our freeways, parking lots, and other surfaces before entering our waterways. Waterways being like beaches, lakes, creeks, streams. Next slide, please. Stormwater runoff is often worsened by human activity that can contain nitrogen, phosphorus, pollutants from fertilizers, and pet and yard waste. Urban flooding results from the combination of surface runoff and poor drainage in urban areas. That's why we're focusing on stormwater and environmental justice today.
Excuse me, Caroline, can you please read a little slower? Thank you.
Yeah, I just thank you. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me introduce Ben Harris, staff attorney with LA Waterkeeper, part of the team that strives to provide water resources and enhance the environment through Los Angeles. Ben was a fellow with the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at UCLA School of Law, where he represents clients in the pursuit of environmental advocacy, as well as co-taught the environmental law clinic there at UCLA. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Ben, our presenter for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. Again, my name is Ben Harris. I am the staff attorney at Los Angeles Waterkeeper, and I have a presentation for you today to talk a little bit more about our work as an organization to address stormwater pollution. I will explain a little bit of background about the issues with stormwater pollution, how it's regulated, and most importantly, what you as community members can do to help address this source of pollution. So I have a quick overview today just to explain the topics that we'll be covering. I kind of already mentioned the general topics, but we'll start with a background on the state of our waters, get a little bit into what our organization does at LA Waterkeeper, and then go into the substance of talking about the connection between environmental justice and water issues, and specifically stormwater pollution, how stormwater pollution is regulated, how we try to fix that issue as an organization, and how communities can get involved. So let's first take a quick look at the state of all of the waterways that we have in LA today. Spoiler, it's not a very great picture, and that's really unfortunate, but we do everything we can to try to improve that outcome. So before we get into the specifics, I want to take a step back and acknowledge that we are all on unceded indigenous lands, specifically the ancestral lands of the Tongva, Tataviam, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. And always important to pay respects to our elders, past, emerging, and present. Now looking at a bigger picture of the Los Angeles area, often we see maps that break down areas based on political boundaries, like Los Angeles County versus other counties, but it's also important to look at it from an environmental perspective. And the best way to do that, to break up areas, is by looking at watersheds. A watershed is just the entire area of land that all drains into the same body of water when it rains. So on the map, you can see a few, it might be a little small, but you can see a few different colors of watersheds that all mean that whole area, all of that water, when it rains, ends up in the same place. So we have a few big ones in LA, the main one being the Los Angeles River watershed, which is in green. The San Gabriel watershed, which is in purple on the eastern side of the map there, is another very big one. And then we also have the Santa Monica Bay that drains into the bay. It includes some other waterways there. Those are the primary waterways, the watersheds that we address as an organization. Now let's look at the quality of the waters. Unfortunately, as this map shows, everything in green is polluted, or the legal term that we use is impaired. And that map shows almost every single waterway here in our area. So pollution is not limited to one specific area. It is pervasive. It is all over the place. So with that background in mind, I want to quickly talk about what we are as an organization, LA Waterkeeper. We have three main roles we play. One would be litigation. We sue polluters. The second one is advocacy. We go to agencies or the legislature or other relevant government actors, and we argue that they should be doing more than what they are. And then the last one being political is similarly, we try to use political connections to get better laws in place to protect our waters and the environment. So this slide shows a few pictures about the history of our organization and also has our mission statement. Our mission is to fight for the health of our region's waterways and for sustainable, equitable, and climate smart water supplies. As an organization, we have been around for 30 years, founded in 1993. Some of the pictures you're seeing there are from the organization's founding. We were first called Santa Monica Baykeeper, and we had our office in Santa Monica. But since then, we have moved to downtown Los Angeles and operate there. We currently have a staff of 13 full-time staff that work to protect our waters in a variety of ways. So now, before getting into details about stormwater, I wanted to take another step back and look at the overall relationship between environmental justice and water issues, as Caroline was alluding to earlier. First, as most of you, I think, are aware of the concept of environmental racism, it's effectively the disproportionate burden of environmental harm that is imposed on people in communities of color or low-income communities when compared to people in white and wealthier communities. Environmental racism is often the result of system-wide policies and practices, which we would call systemic racism, especially when it comes to land use. That is probably the biggest area where historically environmental racism drove a lot of decisions. And the result is that we now have low-income communities and communities of color that live closer to polluting facilities like oil refineries, factories, landfills, or even major highways and roads compared to wealthier and white communities. There was a study conducted by the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, that found that race is a more reliable indicator of proximity to pollution than income, meaning that race is really the driving factor more than community's wealth. And it's also important to know that as climate change gets worse, the impacts to minority communities and low-income communities will just get worse. There will be more extreme events like a drought, flooding, wildfires, extreme heat, and all of those impacts will primarily be seen in these environmental justice communities. Next slide, please. So now I wanted to do a quick overview of this concept of stormwater and runoff. So there's a few terms here that hopefully you can see, but I will try to define them as well. Hardscape, as I've used there, is basically any surface that does not allow water to get through. So that would be mainly concrete, buildings, roads. Water, when it lands on those surfaces, it does not go into the ground, it just runs off to the side. And we also use the term impervious surface. You know, impervious means nothing can get through. Pervious on the other side would mean that stuff can get through. So if you hear me use those terms, that's what I'm referring to. And the other term I wanted to just note quickly on the slide is, if you can see, there's a word evapotranspiring or evapotranspiration. Effectively, that is how water gets from the land into the atmosphere, into the air. And it can happen in two ways. One would be evaporation from surfaces or soils where water just gets too hot and it goes into the air. And then the other one would be transpiration from plants. When plants grow, they give off water. I will try to remember to slow down, apologies. So the connection back to stormwater pollution here is that the more impervious surface that we have, it means less water goes into the ground or infiltrates into the ground where it can become groundwater, and more water flows off the surface into our waterways. And the problem is that our surfaces are very polluted. When we have lots of roads and buildings, all of those impervious surfaces collect a lot of pollution, and it depends primarily on the type of land uses and what pollution comes from those land uses. But generally speaking, if you have more roads, if you have more buildings, then you will have more pollution that accumulates on those surfaces. And it's also important to note that, again, minority communities and low-income communities have higher pollution from urban runoff because they have more percent of land in their communities covered by impervious area, and they have dirtier sources of the runoff because they have more industrial facilities, more major roads, etc. And the last point before I move on is that having more hardscape, having more impervious surface also suggests that there are indicators of other environmental issues in those communities. For example, the more hardscape you have, the less green space there is, the fewer parks there are that create healthy communities that provide opportunities for recreation. And I don't know if everyone has heard of the concept of urban heat island effect. That is the result of having a lot of concrete and impervious surface that when it's really hot, it doesn't absorb any of that heat. It reflects it back into the community, making the community much hotter and creates more extreme heat in these communities. And then, of course, finally, poor air quality. If you have impervious surfaces, you have more activity that generates air emissions and creates more air quality problems, and then health impacts in these communities. So one other slide that's worth acknowledging is the connection between drinking water and environmental justice. Our region uses so much water, more than we can create locally, that we have to import water from other sources, mainly from Northern California and the Colorado River. As a result of these water imports, we have a very complicated water management system in our region. We have over 200 water agencies that supply water to residents. And most of these agencies end up raising their rates for what they charge for drinking water as drought conditions get worse. Rates can be up to 10 times the amount of other communities, depending on what agency is overseeing that community. A lot of these agencies have different programs that are meant to encourage water conservation, or in other words, use less water from all residents or other water users. But a lot of the low-income community members are unable to use those programs effectively for themselves, especially when it comes to rebates, because typically they're in the form of a discount after the fact, and that requires the user to have enough money to pay for upfront actions themselves, like a lawn replacement. And without, subsidies on the front end that make it easy to afford those changes, a lot of community members won't have the ability to get the benefit of the rebate afterwards. A lot of these problems that we're seeing in drinking water are only going to get worse because drought conditions will persist, drought conditions will get worse, and our water system, the infrastructure that we have, all of the pipes, all of the water treatment facilities, they will all need very expensive improvements over time. And to make those improvements, it will cost money, and the money will be collected from the water users. Next slide, please. So moving away from drinking water to water quality, those two are very related, of course, because drinking water can have poor quality on its own. A lot of frontline communities experience issues with water quality due to contaminated soil and groundwater or poorly maintained infrastructure. And in fact, many members of minority and low-income communities report that they do not trust the quality of the water in their own houses, which is not surprising given these issues. But I also wanted to note that water quality is not just limited to drinking water, but it's also about stormwater and the quality of the waterways that we have in our region. Many low-income communities, frontline communities, communities of color have greater flooding risks from inadequate storm drain infrastructure in their communities. Storm drains being if you see on the sides of the street, there's a lot of drains there, gates that take the water and send it out to the ocean. If those are not in proper order, they can back up and they can flood in the streets. And also, as I mentioned before, the lack of green space and parks means that there's less places where water can infiltrate into the ground, where it also gets naturally filtered and becomes a little bit cleaner due to the soil. So when you have those issues with flooding and with poor water quality, all of that polluted stormwater, when it rains, ends up in these waterways in frontline communities and come with a lot of pollutants and can create many negative health impacts for anyone who might be exposed to the water. It can lead to beach closures and degraded groundwater as well. Next slide, please. So that was a quick overview, maybe not as quick as I would have liked, but wanted to now transition to talking about the different sources of stormwater pollution. How can we differentiate between the types of land uses that generate polluted stormwater? And also, let's answer the question, why is stormwater so gross? So first, I wanted to talk about industrial facilities. Industrial facilities are a major source of polluted stormwater. Oftentimes, if you see on the left slide, many industrial facilities do a lot of activity outside. They store materials outside or scrap outside, and it's not covered so that when it rains, all of the water touches the industrial material and the industrial activity, and then it flows offsite. So this is on the left what a bad facility looks like. And on the right, this is what the water coming off these facilities often looks like. If you can see, there's kind of a rainbow colored sheen to the water, and that suggests that there is grease, oil, other pollutants in the water. So this is kind of an open question. Nobody has to answer it, but who here has seen facilities like this in their area? I'm sure many of you have. So the major sources of materials that or pollutants you can see coming off of these facilities include heavy metals, a wide variety of metals, toxic substances or chemicals that you may have heard about, like DDT. That's an old legacy pollutant. Also PFAS, which is kind of an emerging pollutant of concern. You also have oil and grease and other sediment issues. Next slide, please. So let's look at industrial activity in the Los Angeles area. This is a map that shows all of the dots show every facility that is currently regulated, which I'll explain later, in LA County. And you can see this map shows over 5,400 facilities, which is a huge amount, but that's not even all of it. We actually estimate there could be up to 10,000 total industrial facilities. And many of them, the reason why there's that difference is that many facilities illegally fail to get a stormwater permit, which again, I will explain a little bit later. And that can include smaller shops that are, like car mechanics or scrap yards, and also illegal sidewalk industrial operations or repairs. So with this many facilities out there, you can imagine that government agencies that regulate these facilities are unable to inspect all of them to make sure they're all complying. So we'll talk a little bit later about what can be done to address that issue. But on this next slide, I wanted to do a quick comparison between the locations of all these facilities and the location of the communities that face the most environmental pollution burdens. I'm hopeful that everybody here has heard of Cal EnviroScreen, which is a really great mapping tool from the California government that shows communities and the pollution burdens associated with each of them. So when you compare the locations of facilities with Cal EnviroScreen, it's pretty clear, and it shouldn't be a surprise, that a lot of the industrial facilities are located in the communities facing the highest burdens, which are in red in the map. Next slide, please. So here we will zoom in a little bit on kind of the central LA area, and you can see exactly how clustered these industrial facilities are in the communities that have already the most environmental burdens. Often it's East LA, South LA, what we would call the Alameda corridor, if everyone has heard that term. Next slide, please. So that's a quick overview of the landscape of industrial pollution, but wanted to now shift to construction runoff. Everybody here, I'm sure, has seen a variety of construction sites in the area. There's always construction happening somewhere. And when it rains, if the construction site is not doing what it's supposed to do to prevent stormwater runoff, then oftentimes the water coming off the property can be very dirty and gross. As you can see in the picture on the left there, there's water going over kind of a little fence, and it's very brown. So when it's that color, there's probably a lot of sediment in the water, which can cause a lot of harm to the waterway that it ends up in. There's usually a lot of nitrogen from fertilizers, and also oftentimes many types of metals. Another key source is from highways and roads. If everybody has seen a road when it rains, oftentimes there's a lot of oil and grease that you can see as kind of visible sheen. It can create safety issues for cars if it's too slippery. And cars are also a very big source of two main pollutants, two main metals. One is zinc, which is actually contained in most tires, believe it or not. I didn't really know about that before I started at Waterkeeper. And then also copper. Copper is in most brake pads in cars. So when it rains, a lot of the zinc and copper that came off cars on the roads ends up in the water. And then the last one obviously is trash. We all probably have seen people littering, and when you drive along a highway, you might see a lot of trash on, either of the shoulders of the road. And that's another big source of pollution that ends up in our water when it rains. The next source of pollution that many people might not realize is from commercial sites, from shopping malls, big box stores like Costco or Amazon, transportation sites like trucking centers, or even the ports, which is a picture I have on the right, and also just other big parking lots and big roofs for big office buildings. All of those kind of act similarly to highways because you get the same copper, zinc, oil, and grease coming from cars, and it all accumulates on those impervious surfaces, so that when it rains, it ends up just like on highways in our water. And commercial sources have been long ignored. People kind of overlook it and just say, oh, well, whatever, it's just part of the city. But there's been recent attention to try to address that issue specifically. This is, I would say, one of the more important sources of stormwater, which is municipal stormwater. That's what I refer to as the remainder, because it's kind of the catch-all category for everything else beyond what I just talked about. So this would be from residences, from smaller office buildings, from other types of land uses that all fall in the control of the local government, the city, the county that oversees that area. Municipal runoff can be the biggest source of bacteria, where you get a lot of, as you can see in this picture, trash and other stuff that accumulates on the side of a road or sidewalk. And when it rains, it takes all of the bacteria that has started growing on that trash and puts it in the water. You also get the same sources of metals, oil and grease as from cars. And then of course, trash on its own is a big issue. And what's important is that cities operate, as I was mentioning before, a storm drain system. You can see in the picture on the left where all the trash is on kind of the lower part of the sidewalk there, where there's seemingly a hole. That hole is supposed to be a storm drain that collects water when it rains and sends it out into the ocean so that it doesn't flood the streets. But when you have a lot of trash and other pollution in the waterway, the important thing is that it's not treated when it goes through the storm drain system. So whatever pollutants you see on the street end up directly in our rivers, in our creeks, and in our ocean. And the other important, before we go to the next slide, the other important thing is that schools often are part of this municipal stormwater system. And, as we know, in a lot of frontline communities, schools have mostly impervious surfaces, blacktops, very few green spaces or fields. So schools also contribute a lot of stormwater pollution to these city storm drain systems. Now that we've talked about the different sources of pollution, I wanted to try to summarize all of the environmental impacts from that stormwater pollution. First, let's talk about the volume. It is very large, the amount of stormwater we're talking about. During dry weather, when it's not raining, there can be up to 100 million gallons per day from LA County that ends up coming off of these sources and going into the storm drains. That's a lot. When it's not raining, that means it's from irrigation of land. It could be from car washes, other types of water coming off sites for cleaning purposes. And then when it does rain, when there is a storm, it can be up to 10 billion gallons per day that end up in our storm drain system. Overall, that averages 100 billion gallons per year. That is an enormous source of water. And lately, the conversation has not just been about trying to reduce pollution in that water, but also trying to use that water as an opportunity for new water supply, mainly about trying to capture it and put it into the groundwater through infiltration, which would depend on having some green space or other soil that the water can go into. So the conversation has certainly changed recently. But even going back to just the issues with allowing any stormwater pollution, it's not just one type of impact to the environment. There are public health impacts from people that get sick swimming near storm drains or in polluted waters, eating contaminated fish, having contaminated groundwater. And going back to my earlier slides, it's mostly the frontline communities of color that are disproportionately impacted. The ecological impacts are a wide variety. I don't think I need to get into the specifics, but they can be short-term, they can be long-term, they can affect marine environments and also our rivers and inland waters. And these environmental impacts are only going to get worse as climate change creates even more environmental problems. And then finally, the economic impacts, certainly mostly around tourism. If you can imagine how many people come to LA to try to see the beaches or to experience some outdoor recreation. If those beaches and waterways are closed, then we lose tourism revenue. And we also lose productivity when people get sick and they cannot go to work. So overall, it presents many, many types of big problems for our community. So now that we know a little bit more about stormwater pollution, I wanted to talk about what laws we can use to address all of that pollution. First, I wanted to explain the basic law that kind of underpins everything that I'll be talking about next, which is the Clean Water Act. I would hope most people here have heard of the Clean Water Act. It was passed in 1972. So we've had 50 years of regulation under the Clean Water Act. And I have the basics of what it does on the slide, which I'll explain pretty quickly here. First, nobody is allowed to discharge pollution into water without a permit. So if anybody does that without a permit, they are violating the Clean Water Act. And of course, there are many permits, which I will talk about, and those permits create all sorts of requirements on what is allowed and what isn't. So also, if you violate a permit, if you do something the permit does not allow, you are violating the Clean Water Act. And the Clean Water Act is a strict liability law. What that means is that if there's a violation, if somebody does an illegal discharge, it doesn't matter what they were intending. It doesn't matter if it was an accident or on purpose. It's still illegal and they can be held accountable under the law. The next important thing to note is citizen suits. This idea of citizen suits, which just means that members of the public, you or me as individuals, or organizations like LA Waterkeeper, can bring lawsuits against the polluters that violate the Clean Water Act. Other laws, if you know the Clean Air Act, require agencies to do all of the enforcement, but that's not the case here for the Clean Water Act. We can enforce directly. Also, it's limited to just 5 years of violations. So you can't go back more than 5 years to look at a violation that happened 10 years ago. That kind of means that members of the public have to be pretty aware and stay current on what these polluters are doing. And then the final element to mention is this idea of standing, which is a kind of a unique legal idea that just means that the person or group that is suing a polluter has to show that they are injured somehow by the violation. And I will discuss what that means a little bit later. So with the Clean Water Act in mind, there have been many permits, as I mentioned, that were developed to regulate stormwater. And I'll go through each of them here, the main ones that we deal with. The first one, if you remember industrial stormwater pollution, luckily there's a permit that regulates industrial sources. And that permit is a statewide permit, so it applies to all of California. It was issued by the State Water Board, which I've written there. The last draft was first released in 2015 and updated in 2018. So that is what the current version of the permit is. And there's potentially a new permit coming at the end of this year, although it may be delayed beyond that. But that is a very important permit. It regulates, as I mentioned, over 5,000 facilities here in Los Angeles. Now, the next permit is what is called the Construction General Permit, going back to those construction sources. It is also a statewide permit that applies to all of California, issued by the State Water Board. It was actually recently updated last year, so that is the current version of the permit. The problem with this permit is that it is very hard to enforce because, as we know, construction activities are temporary. They do not last forever. The next permit is the Caltrans permit. Caltrans is the state agency that oversees all of our state highways. And there's a permit that applies to Caltrans and everything that that agency does on its own roads. It was also released last year, an updated version by the State Water Board. So again, applies statewide. And that's a really important permit that I'll explain a little bit later how it came to be. Then the next permit, which is not quite in place yet, but is in development, and it's very exciting, is a commercial stormwater permit that will apply only to some specific waterways here in LA, which would be the Dominguez Channel down by the ports, the Los Cerritos Channel, which is a little bit east of the ports, and then the port waters themselves. And this permit is expected to be released this summer, a revised version that will potentially be adopted later in 2023, but we have not yet seen that draft come out. The next permit, which is a hugely important one, is a municipal permit. I used the term MS4 here because that's technically what it's called, the MS4 permit, but you can ignore that and just think of it as the municipal permit. It's really important we have this because otherwise, as I mentioned, that municipal source, which is the kind of the remainder, the backstop for all of those other sources of pollution, it would be unregulated without this permit. So what this permit does is it requires all of the cities and counties and other local governments to do their part to clean up their own storm drain systems. The latest permit in LA, in the municipal permit, was released in 2021, and it is regional. So that's the LA Regional Water Board. It is not statewide. There are different permits in different regions, but we have one in LA from 2021. And then the final permit to mention is, this is actually a statewide permit that would address municipal sources, but it would be limited to schools. It's called the phase 2 permit because it would be limited to schools and some really, really small local cities that currently don't have a permit elsewhere in the state. And that should be coming at the end of this year from the State Water Board. And that would be a huge opportunity to try to green some schools that currently have mostly impervious surface. So now that we have all these great permits, The question is, how can they be enforced? Agencies like the water boards I was mentioning on that previous slide can enforce those permits themselves, but unfortunately, they're not consistent at it. They don't have enough resources to enforce every single violation. And when they do enforce, it's not consistent how far they go with it or what they try to get out of the enforcement action. So that means groups like LA Waterkeeper under the Clean Water Act can also enforce these permits. And we do that quite a lot. And I will quickly explain on this slide some of the results of that enforcement work that we have taken on. So for the industrial permit, the statewide industrial permit, we have brought over 100 facilities into compliance with that permit by suing them over the last 30 years. That has been effectively our, our main bread and butter litigation work, if you will. We have brought in almost $10 million from those lawsuits to fund local projects called supplemental environmental projects, which I will explain a little bit more later on. So it's been a great way to try to reduce industrial stormwater pollution. The next permit is the Caltrans permit that I was mentioning before, the one that regulates a lot of our state roads. That permit actually was created as a result of litigation that we undertook along with the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. We sued Caltrans back in 1993, so 30 years ago, and ended up with a settlement where Caltrans agreed to pay $125 million towards stormwater projects and to reduce the pollution from its roads. It's effectively changed the way that Caltrans builds roads across the state. And this permit only exists because of our lawsuit, because we took that step. The next permit to discuss is the commercial permit. That also was the direct result of litigation that we filed with NRDC and also another group called American Rivers. In 2015, we looked in the Dominguez Channel and the Los Cerritos Channel watersheds and found that these commercial sites are major contributors to a lot of the pollution. And so we asked EPA to do something about it, and they said, no, we don't want to. And so we sued them. And when we won in court, the court said, EPA, you have to do something about these sources of stormwater pollution. So this permit that we have now in these two watersheds is really the result of that lawsuit. And our hope is that after we get this permit in place, we can try to expand it to be a statewide permit. Now, finally, the municipal permit, as I was mentioning before, that applies to cities. It's a really important permit, and it's one that we have tried to enforce for many years. We actually sued LA County back in 2008 for violating an earlier version of the permit. That case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, which was really interesting and exciting. And ultimately, that case settled about 8 years ago. And in the settlement, the county agreed to pay $4 million to help clean up some of its stormwater pollution. But more importantly, that lawsuit is what led to the county pursuing Measure W, which I will talk about later. It will be the subject of a future workshop to go in more detail. But because we sued the county and they were scared that they'd have to do a lot to address their stormwater pollution and they didn't have money to do it, they needed to get money from taxpayers to be able to pay for some of these stormwater projects. And that's where Measure W really came from. Now, I'm sorry for taking a little bit longer than I think we had anticipated. I'll try to go quickly through this next part. Wanted to talk quickly about what we do as an organization and what everybody in a community can do to try to address this problem. As we know, enforcing is just a first step. We can sue all we want, but that really only fixes things on a place-by-place basis. It's more important to look at regionally what we can do collectively. So I'll talk a little bit about what we try to do in that regard. The main thing that we try to achieve as the outcome is to build nature-based stormwater projects. Nature-based meaning that we don't want to add more concrete. We want there to be, more grass, more green space, open space. And we want those projects to still serve the same purpose of capturing stormwater and cleaning it. So when we pursue these nature-based projects, they're not just meant to clean up stormwater. They offer other benefits too, like parks for communities that need it, recreational opportunities for communities that don't have it. Also creating new habitat, new waterways, new native plants that local wildlife can use. And also from a water supply standpoint, we can capture a lot more water by allowing it to pool in a collection pond like what you see in this image, and then infiltrate into the ground and become groundwater. So all of that together creates a lot of benefits and a lot of reasons to try to pursue these nature-based projects that also benefit communities. The picture that I have here is kind of a mock-up of a park called Urban Orchard in Southgate. And I think it's still in development. It was a great multi-benefit project that was led by Trust for Public Land, which is a great nonprofit we work with that tries to build more of these projects. So on the next slide, I wanted to provide a quick list of what different types of multi-benefit projects exist. They can be brand new parks or greenways. It can be taking an existing park and rehabilitating it or improving it to collect more stormwater. We can green schools, as I mentioned before. A lot of them have mostly impervious surface. We can try to create green streets or alleys. As you see in this picture, this is a picture of the East LA Sustainable Median Stormwater Project in the community of South Montebello. And this was just before like a narrow strip of, green grass or something that didn't really serve much purpose and didn't really provide much in the way of stormwater benefits. So now it has become a multi-benefit park that treats a lot of water. It creates some, native trees, recreational walking and jogging paths, and some educational signs. So that's a really great way to turn just our general streets into something more. We also can build pavements, so streets or roads that allow water to infiltrate through them, along with other types of projects that really address specific needs in communities. Another example I wanted to show is what we can do to schools, which is definitely something we're really interested in now. This is a Jackson Elementary School in Pasadena. With this project, you could see on the left, it used to be a big hard top, black top outdoor area for the students to play on. And now they've taken a lot of that away and created more, drought tolerant native planting with soil that can actually infiltrate when it rains. And so it serves so many benefits for both stormwater, but also to help students be healthier when they're outside. So just a really quick look at Measure W. You'll hear about this more later, but this is one of the main funding sources for these types of multi-benefit projects. It has about $280 million every year that is collected from taxpayers that is dedicated to create new multi-benefit stormwater projects. And it's a great opportunity for our community groups to tap into this funding for any projects that they would want to advocate for. Also, the other source of funding is this Supplemental Environmental Project Idea, or SEPS. It's a source of a lot of money for these local stormwater projects. It comes from lawsuits against polluters typically. It's intended to address the pollution that those polluters have added to the waterways. These projects, these SEPs, can be led by a variety of entities, nonprofit organizations like LA Waterkeeper or other community groups, from government agencies as well. And I just listed a few examples of past projects we have helped fund from our lawsuits. You can see the two in the middle there are pretty big. They combine into $4 million. Those were actually the projects that LA County agreed to pay for when we sued them over the municipal permit. So we have many projects other than these four that we funded with our lawsuits, since we've had so many, but just a few to illustrate. And you'll hear more about the Pacoima Beautiful project from Caroline. Some other funding sources that I will just mention quickly. City of LA has a Proposition O that was meant to create a single amount of money to build these projects. Unfortunately, that money is running out, so there's not nearly as much available, and it won't really be added to in the future unless there's a new proposition that is passed. LA County has a few other measures beyond Measure W that generate a lot of money for housing, for parks, for metro. That's kind of what the H-A&M stand for there. The problem is these different measures kind of operate independently, and not the county is not doing a good job of combining all that money into a single project that serves all these different purposes. So as an organization, we try to make sure the county is aware that they can, think broadly beyond just one measure to try to fund a really good project. Then there are some, sources in the state government. I don't need to get into that specifically. The problem is a lot of the state money is very hard to get. You have to apply for it. It's uncertain. There's competition between different regions for it. So it's a little bit hard to, guarantee you can get that money. And then federal, there's all sorts of federal money available, especially under President Biden. The problem is that usually flows through states. And so again, you have to go through the state, and it takes a lot of time to try to get it. It's a little bit even harder than the state money to try to tap into. So that was the overview of the types of projects we work on, the funding sources that we try to use to build those. Now I wanted to end by talking about what can you do to help get involved with stormwater pollution. And I will just preview this by saying these are going to be very quick slides. There will be a handout provided and made available afterwards, if not already, that walks through step by step some of the things that you can really do to investigate certain stormwater issues. But I will just give a quick overview here. So the big four steps that I wanted to talk about: first, how you can be the eyes and ears and work with us at LA Waterkeeper to identify new pollution sources. The second is advocate, be a voice for your own community, and try to tell agencies to pass even stronger stormwater regulations. The third would be to lead and support really good multi-benefit projects that I was talking about in your own communities. And then the last one is try to do some enforcement detective work yourself. Sleuthing kind of means, be a detective and investigate things yourself. So let's get into each of those a little bit more. First, being the community eyes and ears. The term we also use for that is ground truthing, that we need to verify things on the ground by going to these sites to make sure that they're as dirty as they might seem to be. So we typically would do that by driving by the facility or visiting it on foot and taking pictures and videos. There's two main times where you'd want to do this. This slide talks about dry weather, what you want to do when it's not raining, what you want to look for. This picture shows some of the issues. You see a lot of industrial activity happening outside. You see some water trickling off of the site when it's not raining, so that really shouldn't be happening. Also, it's pretty discolored. You can tell the floor is very brown and seems to have a lot of sediment collected on the ground. So all of that suggests that there's a big problem, and the handout will have more step-by-step on what to look for. The other side of the coin is to go to facilities during wet weather when it's raining and see what you can see with, pictures and videos. This is the same image I showed earlier. You could see this water very oily, has a sheen and unnatural color. So if you see that coming off of a site, that probably suggests it's polluted water. And when it's raining, you can also see if the facility has a lot of industrial activity happening outside and uncovered when it shouldn't be. Now, once you are able, if you choose to do some of this investigation yourself and go look at facilities that you see are dirty, you can send pictures and videos to us at LA Waterkeeper. I've put some of our information there, which you can access later on when looking at the slides. And if you just tell us everything you know about the facility, then we can take a closer look and help clean it up in your neighborhood. Now, here's a really important way you can help. If we do find a facility in your community that's really dirty, an industrial facility, and you want to help out even more than just giving us pictures and videos, there's a great way you can do that, which is to help be a witness for us when we bring a lawsuit. Effectively, as I mentioned before, under the Clean Water Act, LA Waterkeeper needs to show that we're injured and harmed by pollution. And we can do that by showing that we have a member, which can include you and members of the community, to show that you have used the waterways that are getting polluted by the facility and that you are harmed by that pollution. So if you wanted to be a standing witness, there would just be a few things that you might need to do in the case. Mostly it would just be speaking with our attorneys and writing up some statements about how you're harmed by the pollution, and potentially even more than that, depending on the type of case it is. But ultimately, it's a really great way to give back to the community and help be the direct advocate yourself to clean up dirty places in your community. But just note, this is optional. You would never be required to do this. If you did send us pictures or videos of a facility you think is polluting, if you wanted to do it, we would be very happy to have you help us, but you do not have to. So just wanted to make that disclaimer. So the next thing I said on kind of the overview slide that you can do, other than just look at facilities yourself, is to advocate for strong regulations. LA Waterkeeper does that a lot on our own, so you can follow us on social media, on our website. We will put out calls for help whenever there's a particular time that you can help us advocate, but you can also track these meetings yourself. And I've put links to the main two agencies on this slide, the LA Regional Water Board here in Los Angeles and the State Water Board, both of which pass new permits that regulate stormwater. I've also listed the two main permits to be looking out for that should be coming soon: the commercial permit here in Los Angeles and the statewide permit that will regulate schools. Another way you can help is to lead any stormwater projects in your neighborhood, or also support others that have really good multi-benefit stormwater projects. The Safe Clean Water program is what was created by Measure W. It has a lot of public meetings and committees that you can attend to hear about the different types of projects that might be happening in your community and offer support for the projects you think are best. I've put some links to some of those committees that you can look at later and try to track yourself. You can also help support some of our nonprofit efforts. That's what NGO means, to develop good projects. I mentioned there was a group, Trust for Public Land, that was building that urban orchard project in Southgate, but there are also coalitions of other NGOs that work together. Sorry, going a little too fast there. Some of the coalitions that I've listed here have websites that you can go to and get more information about some of the projects that they're working on. And then finally, the last thing was to be your own sleuth or be your own detective and investigate facilities a little bit more closer yourself, beyond just looking at it when it's dry or when it's raining. And we have a quick, 5-step list here. This list is much more described in much more detail in this handout that you will get later. I just wanted to show a few pictures here of what that might look like. So on the next slide, you can see how you can look at facilities on Google Maps. If people have used Google Maps, they have great images of both, satellite views and also from the street, where you can kind of see what facilities look like. The next slide shows a picture of the database that the State Water Board runs. It's called SMARTS, and that has a lot of information about industrial facilities, compliance documents, results of past stormwater sampling, and the handout will give you much more information on how to use this program to investigate a particular facility. So finally, I apologize for taking so much time, but just wanted to do the quick summary again of ways you can get involved here, be the community eyes and ears, and work with LA Waterkeeper on that. Be a voice yourself for stronger regulations of stormwater pollution. Support good multi-benefit stormwater projects in your neighborhoods when you hear about them. And then lastly, do your own investigation and be your own detective for stormwater pollution. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much. I apologize for going a little bit longer than intended, but I hope that was informative and happy to discuss at the Q&A session if you have any questions.
Great. That was a wonderful presentation, Ben. We learned a lot. So we're going to take a 10-minute break for everybody to stretch their legs and do whatever. I'll keep the time. And so see you back at, I'm looking at Sarah's time, 11:29. We'll be right back. All right, everyone, we're back. Everyone a minute. So now we're gonna go into our question and answer session. Please keep in mind that we have interpreters here. So if you have a question, please come close to the mic. Speak loudly, and you can ask your question that way. Also, the chat is open if you would like to ask a question through chat. I'm gonna lead off with just starting one, recognizing LA Waterkeeper. Thank you, Ben, for the great presentation. It was very helpful, very insightful. And I just want to talk about my personal experience with LA Waterkeeper. I was working in Watts, and I am very familiar with that 103rd Street project. You know, sometimes living in community, you get used to certain inequities, certain issues that you have in your community. And then that 103rd Street project, you know, you just might see it as stormwater pooling in an area, but there was a bus stop there, and that stormwater was also going into the Compton Creek. And the Compton Creek is one of the largest tributaries to the LA River, and we know the LA River goes into the ocean. So it looked like a small project, but there's a lot into that. So that's why it's very important for us to connect with organizations like Los Angeles Waterkeeper, LA Waterkeeper, when we have these issues. And that brings me to my first question. So when, you know, we're going in our communities, going around Ben, and like we had all this rain and there's still more on the way potentially. Like, how can we address these issues when we see them? You walked us through like different ways, but here I am, I'm in my area, I'm seeing stormwater. What's the best way to connect with LA Waterkeeper? And also what would be my role as a community member, how to address this, what I assume is stormwater runoff pollution?
Yeah, those are great questions. I think the main thing as an organization that is hard for us is to be everywhere at once, right? So we can't see what is happening when it rains in every community. So, you know, for sure, what I was saying in the slides is really helpful for us is if you as community members know of a particular facility that you see is dirty, you smell, you know, odors coming from the facility, you hear loud noises, and you are concerned that they are also polluting the stormwater. If you can, you know, do a little bit of recon yourself and take some pictures and videos, that helps us narrow in on that as a potential target for us. But even more broadly, if you're concerned about pollution in your area, another thing we can't see as much is flooding. We know a lot of communities face flooding risks when it rains, and we hear about it all the time. We have tried at some points to go out. I have gone out to the LA River and other communities to try to see what I can see, but I'm just one person. So I can't be, you know, seeing the entirety of the river when it rains all at once. If you can also send pictures of, you know, dirty stormwater in the streets, or, you know, pooling areas of flooding in certain communities, that helps us know that there's a bigger problem at play that might be more of the municipal issue, right? So we can enforce the municipal permit, which we tend to do with kind of publicly available data that the cities collect on their own stormwater quality. But as we all know, that's just one piece of the story, because that doesn't capture the flooding, that doesn't capture what it actually looks like when it rains and how dirty that stormwater looks, what trash might be there. So yeah, for sure, any evidence or information that you can provide as community members to us that will allow us to look closer into the issue with you will be really helpful for us to help address these hotspots of pollution.
Great. So I just want to remind everyone, like when it rains and, you know, you go on your normal route, whether you're taking a bus, taking a walk, driving, and like me, where I feel like sometimes my car's going to hydroplane. This is a good to notate that intersection. Definitely go back, try and take pictures or videos and then get in contact with the folks at LA Waterkeeper so they can help you guide through it. Not just Waterkeeper, you can definitely get in contact with LA EJ Network. We work closely with LA Waterkeeper. We're here because there's a lot of money here to address these issues and to beautify our communities and to also address environmental justice concerns and open space concerns. So I'm gonna look, I don't see any questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand if you have a question or come up to the mic.
Hey, we have a question, Caroline.
Yay, okay.
Go ahead, Izzy.
So my question is in connection to what you just said. What if the pollution does not affect me directly? I'm just passing by and I see it and I want to send a picture. Is it allowed also?
Yeah, for us, for general purposes, it doesn't have to be something that directly affects you. If you are concerned about any pollution or any flooding issues anywhere, and you want to just raise that to our attention, we will be happy to look into it. And whether you would want to be part of the next steps of that is up to you. If it's a community you were just driving through and it's not yours, that's totally fine, because we want to help everybody we can, and we're still able to take a closer look. I think if you were asking about, being a standing witness, that is something that you would have to show that you're harmed by the pollution, but that's a different question that really relates to specific industrial facilities that you are concerned about in your community. And again, you don't have to be that kind of a witness. If you don't want to go that far, totally fine. But any pictures, videos, other evidence or concerns that you can raise would help us take a closer look.
Okay, now I see Susie de Santiago's group. Someone have a question there?
Okay, go ahead.
Sí. Mencionaron, mi nombre es Emanuel y mencionaron un link para reportar la calidad de agua que está mal. Si nos pueden compartir ese link para que lo podamos tener, por favor.
May I please get an English translation?
Then I think you have to choose the English channel.
Oh, I see.
Thank you.
I can say it in English too.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I really appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I was just asking about the link. Hey, where you mentioned where we could report the water that wasn't of good quality. If you can share it so we can have it, so we.
I'm sorry, can you repeat? You want me to share?
It's I believe it's the smarts link with
Yes.
regional water boards. And also we're gonna have a packet with some information from LA Waterkeeper. And also we're gonna be sending out a poll as well.
Yeah, so if you're asking about how you can, investigate these facilities yourselves, there is that database online that will have a step-by-step instruction on where to click, what to search for, and it will help you guide you through that process of how to find stormwater sampling results from certain facilities, and even helps you figure out what levels would be dirty compared to cleaner stormwater. So look for that handout, that packet. It should be coming soon, and I want to make myself available if you wanted to look at it and look closer. And if you have any questions on how to use it, what to look for, I will be personally available to the extent I can to help answer any questions.
Cynthia, see your group, you have a hand raised.
Yes, go ahead, Lisa.
I just would like some clarification in regards to under the basics of the Clean Water Act. And it's saying, need to show standing and showing that you're hurt by this violation. Why does it, I guess, why does someone have to be compromised in regards to having to be hurt before something is actually done?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish it wasn't the case, but the way our legal system works, unfortunately, is it does not really allow somebody to sue somebody else just because they know they're breaking a law. So for example, if we're in California and we know somebody is, polluting stormwater in New York, we just can't do it legally. We're not authorized to do that because then anybody could be sued by anybody is kind of the theory there, right? So the idea of standing is it's really under the United States Constitution of where it comes from, but when it's applied to the Clean Water Act, if we wanted to sue somebody, we have to show it affects our organizational interests, which is why we also can't really sue outside of California or even outside of Los Angeles. But also what it means to be harmed isn't that you got sick from the stormwater or that it affected your personal property or where you live, but just knowing that you have an interest in clean water, that you use the waterways that's polluted stormwater goes into, like the Los Angeles River. If you walk along it, if you bike along it, you don't have to get inside the water, but that's the kind of harm that you have to show. It's in some ways a low standard and fairly easy to show it, but at other times and in other ways, it can be kind of annoying burden to have to show, which is why we try to work as best we can with community members to build up our network of witnesses that we can potentially use in certain cases.
Thank you, Ben. Susan, were you coming close for a question or?
I have a question though. That's a bit more time.
We have one more question here.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, sure. Cynthia's group, please. Thank you.
Okay, so the question I have, it has to do with the permit. So the question is, the permit that is given, is it especially for the industries, commercial stormwater permit? Is it for them to pollute within a certain threshold? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. If I can repeat my understanding of it, the industrial permit, does it require facilities to have their stormwater within a certain threshold? And the answer is yes. There are many different types of pollutants that are regulated, whether it's metals, zinc, copper, lead, even some of the more heavier toxic metals. And for each of those, the permit has a specific level that says, if you go above this, if you sample your own stormwater and it shows that you have more zinc or more copper than you're supposed to, then that could be a violation. There's kind of there's a lot of technical quirks to it where some levels that they have are just kind of like soft violations where, oh, if you exceed it once, maybe that's not an issue. But if you exceed it every single time, then that's an issue. And then there are other levels that basically say, if you go over this by even the smallest margin once or twice, then you could, be found violating. So that's why it's important. And the handout sets some of those levels for you if you wanted to look at it. That's why it's important to look at all of this data that the facilities provide with their stormwater sampling, so that we can look at it and say, oh, there's an issue here with zinc, there's an issue there with, copper. And also it's more than just metals, it's other types of pollutants as well.
Thank you, Ben. Susie, I see your group has your hand raised.
Ay, sí, una de las preguntas que tenemos aquí es de cómo es que se puede reportar el mal uso o el desgaste del agua cuando nosotros aquí intentamos reportarlo con la ciudad y la ciudad nos dice que no es responsabilidad de ellos y que llamemos a la, perdón, que llamemos a la compañía del agua. Y cuando llamamos a la compañía del agua, nos dicen que no nos preocupemos, que al fin y al cabo las personas están pagando por el agua. Entonces, y luego pues eso afecta también porque cuando, por ejemplo, un vecino está dejando ir mucha agua, se está yendo ahí al drenaje que está en la calle y entonces pues con la basura y todo eso se empieza pues también a ver la contaminación, ¿verdad? Pero como no hay con quién reportarlo o con quién se haga responsable, porque aquí la ciudad y la compañía del agua, los dos no se quieren hacer responsables. Entonces, ¿a dónde vamos en ese caso?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I'm sorry that you were seeing that in your neighborhood. I will say that's one part of the water issue that I didn't really talk about in the presentation, which is wasteful water use, right? I talked a little bit about water conservation and how some, drinking water agencies like LADWP, maybe for many of you, or one of the many others in the region, they try to prevent that kind of wasteful water use, but there's really not much they can do from the water agency or water company side to stop it. The city is supposed to be responsible. I was also mentioning that when it's not raining in LA, there's up to 100 million gallons of water per day that is, wasted, that is sent out into our waterways when it really shouldn't be. That's what we call, to use kind of the technical term, a dry weather discharge. So it's not raining, but there's still some water that's coming off. And you're absolutely right to try to go to the city first, because the city is ultimately responsible for that under that municipal permit. They're not supposed to have any dry weather discharge happening. At the same time, I can understand that it is very hard for cities to actually enforce every single time that does happen. But what is supposed to happen is that you report it to the city and the city investigates if they have enough, resources and staff to actually do that. If the city is not listening to you and says, no, this is not our problem, we can't do anything about it, I would certainly encourage you to come to us, because we do often try to advocate to cities to stop those issues. We sometimes have meetings with those city staff to talk about what we're seeing. And so the more evidence we have from you that there is wasting water, from too much irrigation or people just dumping it in the streets, we can try to help you get to the bottom of it and tell the city they need to do something about it. But what's really supposed to happen is that you report it to the city and that they'll do something about it. And I appreciate your effort and your interest in, trying to report those issues.
Oh, please, yes, Susie, please continue.
Ok, una pregunta más. Es continuación de la pregunta que se hizo. ¿Hay manera de poder educar a nuestra ciudad y a la compañía del agua? Porque las dos es una ciudad pequeña y a la misma vez la compañía del agua pues también es una compañía del agua pequeña. Entonces, pienso que si se les puede de educar a ellos de alguna manera de que hay que tomar responsabilidad de informar a las personas de la ciudad aquí que vivimos, entonces es como vamos a poder ayudar a que se disminuya esos desgastes, ¿verdad? Entonces, si hay manera de poder hacer eso, pues estaría magnífico.
Yeah, that's a really great question too. I think when I hear what your issue is, it sounds like it's really less about the water company or the water agency as much as it is the person that's using the water that they're receiving. As I was mentioning before, the water agencies unfortunately don't really have any power to tell the people it's sending its water to how they can use it. It really should be up to the cities to control that. So I think the best way for you to kind of try to educate the right people yourself would be to go to the city. It sounds like you're in a smaller city, so it's not the city of Los Angeles. And if there's a city council meeting or other public places where you can go and comment to your city officials and tell them, hey, this is a big problem. I see this happening all the time. Here are some examples. Here are some pictures. Here are some addresses where people are wasting water. And if you repeat that message at a bunch of different meetings and tell them, hey, you need to do something about this. This is an issue under your municipal stormwater permit. You're not supposed to be allowing this. Or, telling them that, it's a waste of water in drought conditions. We need to conserve water. Then hopefully hearing enough people enough times say that same message, you might get a little bit more effort on the part of the city to take it seriously. So that's what I would recommend for you as an individual. And of course, if this is something that the city ignores, we would be happy to look into it further and try to help you with that advocacy and see if there's anything we can do on our part to get the city to take it more seriously.
Great, thank you. I think that's all for the questions. I don't see anything in the chat. So we're gonna wrap this up. Thank you very much, Ben. Thank you, LA Waterkeeper, for being here with us. Please stay posted. Oh, someone saying bye or raising, okay. It looks like we have a question. Sure.
Go ahead.
Hola, buenas tardes ya. No, buenos días. Mi nombre es Cecilia. Quiero hacer un comentario, en realidad no es pregunta. Nuestra ciudad fue poquito como presionada a aceptar hacer más viviendas. Nuestra ciudad es una ciudad muy, ¿cómo se dice? Populada. Es una ciudad pequeña, pero es la ciudad más populada de la nación. Entonces, al hacer más viviendas, vamos a perder más espacio verde. Y nada más quería comentar, porque por un lado estamos tratando de cuidar nuestra agua, de protegerla, pero por otro lado estamos haciendo puro concreto. So, es un comentario nada más. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for that comment. And I think it's an important one because it just shows the importance of land use decisions. If we were to build, housing is incredibly important, right? Because we have so many unhoused people, we have so much demand. But if we were to build all housing and nothing else, then we might have too much housing and we might have a lot of environmental problems from that. So there absolutely needs to be a balance. And one of the ways that we try to achieve that balance is for new housing projects, we try to advocate that it also includes some green space and open space that serves both the people that will live in that new housing, but also that it will be publicly accessible by people in the neighborhood as well, so that it's not just about focusing on one benefit at a time, housing over everything else, but it's about multiple benefits. It's about environmental benefits, ecological benefits, stormwater benefits, and housing benefits. So thank you for that comment.
Thank you.
¿Tiene alguna otra pregunta, Mario? ¿Estamos bien?
Okay, if we can bring the presentation back up, please. Okay. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this Pacoima Beautiful nonprofit organization, what they did in their community to address stormwater concerns and also have an open meeting space. So this is the Bradley Green Alley project. It's a 2-block section. It's less than an acre. It's 0.67 acres of this alley that is in their area that was impacted by stormwater runoff. This project was initiated by the city of Los Angeles, which Pacoima, and then it's a joint project with Pacoima being beautiful and the city of Los Angeles. And what they did, they were able to put in some underground stormwater capture features, because water that was flowing in this alley would also lead into the Tahunga Wash, which goes into the Los Angeles River. One thing that we're going to talk about in workshop 3 is these tributaries that all connect to each other that affect our stormwater. That's why it's really important to address environmental justice issues, and also to utilize the funding from not only Measure W, Safe Clean Drinking Water, but also Measure A, which is parks, Measure M that Ben also mentioned, which is with Metro, and also Measure H that addresses homelessness. One of these, with all these are all county funds that we as residents, as taxpayers in the county of Los Angeles pay into. So it's very important that we plug into this, and that we also use these funds and like work together and have more education about this. So these are some photos of the Green Alley. I'm gonna drop the link in the chat, because there's also a 4-minute video there that talks about how this project came about. But this is just some of the projects, smaller scale projects, that we want you all to keep in mind as we go into workshop 4, and also, excuse me, workshop 3 and 4, where we're talking about these projects and also how to identify them in our community. All right, next slide, please. So speaking of our next workshop, we're going to have workshop 3, and that's going to be at the new Urban Magic Johnson Recreation Center. People familiar with the area, this was a housing development before that for environmental justice issues needed to be redeveloped, and now it's a park space. It's a large park space. They have a lot of stormwater capture features here. And what we're going to do at this workshop, we're going to definitely have our stormwater coordinators. These are nonprofit groups that have employed folks to work in our communities to help us address our stormwater concerns. So we're going to be meeting with them. So definitely feel free to take pictures of potential projects in your area so you can meet with them, and also take a look at these projects and see, get some feedback on it. Because with this Measure W, Safe Clean Drinking Water, you might hear us say Measure W or Safe Clean Drinking Water. So excuse me, Safe Clean Water, excuse me. Has a pot of money that's there to address these kind of concerns. And we want to help you to get in contact with your stormwater coordinator. There's also going to be a consultant there just to help talk about the process of these projects. These are long projects. These are anywhere from 2 to 3 years. So this is like a very long process, especially when you get into these bigger projects. But for some of the smaller ones, there is money in there for you all. And there are ways to address it to do smaller projects. And if anyone has any questions on workshop 3, or we can go, someone coming up for a question? Oh, okay. Okay, then we can go to the next slide. And we did that. We can go to the next slide. So thank you all for attending. If anyone has any questions, we can stick around for a couple minutes. Definitely, once again, thank you to Ben and LA Waterkeeper. Thank you all for giving us this part of your Saturday, and we definitely look forward to having you for workshop 3 and 4. Cynthia, do you have anything to say in closing? Oh, I see hands raised now. I apologize.
Put the pizza away.
Okay. Isidra, you have a question?
Hola, sí, buenos días. No, disculpen, nomás era un comentario, decirles que gracias por la invitación y gracias por toda la información, muy interesante y estamos aprendiendo, y nomás quería darles las gracias por invitarnos y por estar informadas acerca de cómo ahorrar lo de las aguas y lo de las aguas, ¿cómo? Disculpen, aguas
Pluviales.
Pluviales, disculpen, y nomás quería darle las gracias por la invitación y de que muy interesante la información y así estamos aprendiendo cómo ahorrar agua y todo eso. Gracias.
You're welcome. That's great to hear. Okay, Florence, please. You have them.
Yes, hello. My first thing is to say hello to all of our folks at the Del Amo Center. It's always nice to see all of you. I did want to ask a little question. It's not, I don't think, but I'll ask it. You mentioned that a person who was a witness would need to have experienced some negative outcome from what was going on. But does that always mean that they waited around in the polluted water, or does that mean that if you see harm coming to your community and you feel that it's affecting your community, like stormwater that might run off of a number of shops around an alley that goes out to the street through the area where people live, is that what one might think of as having standing because you live in that community and you see what's happening?
Yeah, thank you, Florence. That's a really good question. And I am glad to hear interest in this idea of being a witness. I do want to clarify, just to add a little more detail, a couple points. First, you asked if somebody needs to wade in the water or touch the water themselves. The answer is no. You absolutely do not need to do that to show that you are harmed. The second question you asked is if you can, be harmed by observing it in the streets and alleys. The answer to that is most likely no, because the way the Clean Water Act works is that it's based around the pollution in the waterway. So if that would be the LA River, you have to show that you're using the LA River, which is where the pollution ultimately goes. And to use the LA River, you don't have to be touching it. You don't have to be in it. You just have to have some value. Maybe it's like aesthetic value. You like looking at the river. You like doing that when you're walking or biking along the river. And once you know that it's polluted from stormwater from this one source, then you lose value in that, right? You don't look at the river anymore and think, wow, it's a beautiful, clean river. You look at it and say, wow, it's really polluted by this facility and other facilities. So that's what I was saying earlier, that it's kind of a low standard in some ways, but there are still very specific things we would have to show. But I appreciate your interest in learning more about that. And I'd be happy to answer more questions if anybody wanted to reach out to me afterwards.
Could I just ask another quick question? The waterway where the water would go is the Dominguez Channel.
Yeah, that's great. And that works too. So, we have some active cases against facilities that discharge their water and it ends up in the Dominguez Channel. So that is totally a valid place to have that kind of harm happen and that recreational interest happen.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone. Ben, thank you so much for your time.
Oh,
Thank you so much. We're actually going to take
to see how many we are too.
Yes.
So,
hold on just a moment, everyone, while I get everything set up so we could take a screenshot of all the groups together. So give me
Okay.
just while I figure that out.
While you're doing that, Sarah, I just want to say I can't thank you all enough to the presenters and also to our engaged community members. I'm really excited for the projects that you guys are going to think of and come up with. And, don't forget to reach out to Sarah, Caroline, or myself so that we can help you along with your projects. And look at this terrific, amazing, awesome group of people. Thank you, group leaders.
Yes, and I'm gonna give you a quick like 3, 2, 1 countdown and we'll do that screenshot, okay? So when everyone's ready, 3, 2, 1. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. If you have any questions, send an email.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Caroline, for presenting,
What about the,
orchestrating.
Thank you so much.
there's another
Really
group.
appreciate everything.
Oh.
El micrófono.
Enjoy your pizza. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.